Welcome to Living in Hertfordshire. For the last 100 million years, we're going to be moving over the next few minutes at around about 6.5 million years a minute. So just when are we talking about? We've got the time scale here. We can't cover the whole of that, and we don't have that in Hertfordshire. What we do have is a period covering the Cretaceous. So we'll be starting at around about 100 million years. We'll move up to around about 60 million years, and then we'll finish off by skipping right up to about 500,000 years ago. So quite a lot of time to cover. We're going to be starting 100 million years ago. That's just about the boundary between the late and the early Cretaceous, or the Albian and the Cenomanian. In the early Cenomanian, the situation, the paleogeography over the Northwest Europe and around the UK looks something like this. We've got open seas covering most of Europe, except for Scandinavia and the other high areas like the Scottish Highlands, the Shetlands, the Lake District, maybe Wales and Ireland as well. With Dartmoor and the granite areas, those sticking up through the sea. There's also a deep submarine lit rift down the middle of what is the North Sea. Hertfordshire, which is popping up there as a red star, was totally submerged, probably under about 100 meters of water. So during the Cenomanian, situation looked probably a bit like this. We had plenty of ammonites swimming around. There's loads of those that we find. We don't try and find too many mosasaurs, but there is evidence that where they did occur later in the late Cretaceous. And we do find it. This is Stone Quarry, which sits right on the boundary between Hertfordshire and Buckinghamshire. And this is what we call Quarry 2. If we look at that, we have the zigzag formation up at the top with a ragstone in the middle. And then below that, into the lake section, we have the older West Melbury early Cenomanian section. That's mainly a series of limestones and claystones. And those yield a whole series of fossils, lots of ammonites. We see mammites in there, and then in the zigzag formation at the top, we get Schlumbergia. So those are well formed. Inoceramid bivalves are pretty rich as well. And it's also common to find the sponges, particularly in the limestones. So we have a really well-established Cenomanian section underlying the whole of the chalk in the Hertfordshire area. Right at the very top of Quarry 2, we get into the Plenus Marls. And this is taking us right up into what is now called the White Chalk Group. The Plenus Marls occur right at the base of the section, so at the bottom left on the slide that you can see here, and they're overlain by the Melbourne Rock. In the Plenus Marl, life wasn't particularly good. And a lot of the ammonites, the organisms that were living there, either died, even became extinct, because it represents a major oceanic anoxic event. We've got really good evidence for this event in the Hertfordshire section of Pitstone 2. So, and that again is present underlying Hertfordshire. We don't see it, we would find it in deep boreholes, but certainly we don't find it anywhere else at surface. So that was the situation in the Cenomanian through into the middle chalk. But during the late Cretaceous, we have a whole succession of sea level rises. And this is the map. This takes us through even later up into the Campanian, but the whole of Europe now, except for those really high areas, is under marine waters. Scandinavia is still land, and so are the Scottish Highlands, but the rest of Britain is now underwater. Sea levels are probably higher than they've ever been before, and certainly they've not been this high since. So sea levels in Hertfordshire with this level were really very, very high. The other thing to be aware of is that the Atlantic was beginning to open. The area of England with a whole series of structures through it. And those structures in the Atlantic were beginning to throw up volcanic eruptions along the opening oceanic ridge. The ash from those eruptions, following this with Coriolis forces that occur in the atmosphere, circulated into Western Europe, just like they did back in 2010 when the Icelandic eruption took place at that stage. And we see evidence of those eruptions in the chalk of Hertfordshire. There are clay seams which we can pick out. These are at Royston in North Hertfordshire, and they represent some of these volcanic events that took place, which threw out ash into the open sea, and it was deposited on the sea floor. So that's what we get covering a lot of the middle chalk. Typical white chalk. You'll notice there's no flints in this. It's very rare to see flints at this level in the chalk. But occasionally, the rate at which sea level was rising halted for a time, and the sea floor was burrowed by worms, crustaceans like shrimps and crabs, and the burrows eventually became hardened and mineralized. We can see the burrow systems in this block here. And we end up with, if you like, a fossilized sea floor or hard ground that we locally call the chalk rock. And you can see the mineralization, the green glauconite and the pale brown phosphatic mineralization within the chalk at this level. It's an extremely important level when it comes to water supplies through Hertfordshire, and it's been mapped right the way across the country. So it is extremely important. Just above the chalk rock, we get another hard ground called the top rock. And this is exposed very nicely in a quarry called Springfield Quarry on the western edge of the county. You can actually see it curving through the exposure here. And if you look at the flints that we get at this level, you can see there's just a hint of anticline. So we see some evidence of folding at this level within the chalk. And this has been picked up at other levels by the Geological Survey. Above that, we get into what you would consider to be, if you like, a normal white chalk with bedded flints. And this is Cody Quarry in North Hertfordshire, and it represents deposition around about 88 million years ago. And again, it's a typical white chalk with flints. And it's also probably some of the youngest chalk we see in the county. Any chalk that was deposited later than this has been eroded. We don't see any chalk younger than the micraster chalks in the Seaford Formation across any of Hertfordshire. Typically, the fossils we find in here are the micraster echinoids, sidrid echinoids, sponges like ventriculites, and the clams like spondylids. So it's very fossiliferous, and it's the youngest chalk we will see. We do get chalk right up against the base of the tertiary deposition in Hertfordshire, and it is exposed. And if we look at what was going on in the Paleocene, there's the area that we're talking about right up. We can see that there is a shoreline with open marine conditions still in the North Sea basin. But at the end of the Cretaceous, if you like, during the early Paleocene, we're actually seeing the deposition of marginal marine deposits, probably through the county. And if we go to Harefield Chalk Pit on the western edge of Hertfordshire, we see the top of the chalk. We're looking at the Seaford Formation again in this location, but it's been intensely burrowed. And we've actually got a 27 million year time gap represented by this unconformity surface. It's incredibly important that this is preserved. It's getting very degraded, and this needs to be looked at very closely. But I know that it's going to be worked on over the next 12 months by the London Geodiversity Group. So the burrows are formed by some sort of an organism. We're not sure what it is, but this is the type section of Glyphinus airfieldensis, and it really does represent the major boundary between the late Cretaceous chalk and then the flint bullhead bed of the basal Lambeth group. So an extremely important site and well worth preserving. The next bit of time that we see represented is around about 57 million years ago. Pebbles that have been eroding out of the chalk probably formed a marginal marine strand line, something like this. And during the really excessive thermal maximum at the Paleocene-Eocene boundary, those pebbles were set into a hard silicious matrix, and that leaves us with the Hertfordshire pudding stone. 57 million years ago, that is what was being formed around and across Hertfordshire, and it is what has come to represent the county. It's a bit of a one-off because we do not see a great deal of tertiary material subsequent to this. We may have a little bit of Pliocene sitting up at Little Heath in Berkhamsted. So we started back here in the 100 million years ago. We've worked our way up through the late Cretaceous. We've popped up as far as the 57 million years ago in the formation of the Hertfordshire pudding stone. But we're now going to skip really quickly up to about 500,000 years ago. Well, a mere 450,000 years ago. So what was going on in Hertfordshire at that stage? This is what it looked like probably through the Vale of St. Albans. We've got evidence of mammoth sitting up just north of the county in Buckinghamshire around that Pitstone College Lake section. And if we look at the temperature scale at this time, the period we're looking at is right there, 450,000 years ago, when it was really cold. And we're in the Anglian ice stage, the Anglian glacial period. If we look at that on a global scale, you can see ice sheets which are coming right the way across Europe. We had the situation where ice extended right the way down into Hertfordshire, which if we look where we're sitting, that's where Hertfordshire would be. And the green line at the bottom here, this was the Proto-Thames. The line of the original River Thames comes straight through the county. That was emptying into a lake, which eventually would burst through and form the English Channel. But at this stage, the Proto-Thames was blocked by the ice coming down through the Vale of St. Albans. Or this is a modern day situation where we have a great ice sheet blocking a lake to the southwest. And this is what happened through St. Albans, where the ice around about the position of the M1 and the M25 junction now was actually a major lake. And that backed up down the River Colne and forced the River Thames onto its present route. But previously, all these sands and gravels were deposited along the line of the original River Thames, and we still see those. If we go into the Vale of St. Albans, you can see this fantastic sort of valley coming through here, and that is underlain by sands and gravels, which are all deposited by the Proto-Thames, which predates that Anglian ice sheet. So there's more to Hertfordshire geology than just a pile of pudding stone. And you can check it out if you go to the Hertfordshire Geological Society website. There it is at the bottom of the page. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to seeing you.